Welcome to lesson 10 of your level 3, which is myofascial lines and meridians. The learning objectives for this lesson are as follows. You'll be able to understand the role of fascia, identify the major myofascial lines in the body, understand fascia's role in movement, and to understand fascia's application for fitness clients and medical therapists. Just to give you a heads up before we go into this lesson, this is one of the lessons that we've put in as a company to bolster and add value to your education. You won't actually be formally assessed on anything you learn from lesson 10. Okay, so the fundamentals of fascia, what is it? You may have heard of this term quite a lot, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. It's very popular now amongst physios, any form of therapist, and it's becoming more apparent and to the forefront of things with personal trainers and fitness professionals. Fascia is the term for the soft tissue or the collagenous network that surrounds the muscles, binding the different structures together. It's sometimes known as the extracellular matrix. You can think of it as like a spider's web, kind of binding all of the structures in our body together. A myofascial line, or myofascial lines, are lines of fascial structure consisting of membranes and ligaments, and they include both the superficial and the deep connective tissue, and they can be loose and tight. So you might have heard or had something like a myofascial massage, which is not as deep as a sports massage. It's more of that secondary layer, closer to the surface of the skin, that is really about lengthening the fascia and getting more nutrients to the area, as opposed to getting into the muscle and breaking it down. Fascial lines create stability, resistance, power, flexibility, elasticity, and above all, compensatory posture. So we look at things like posture through muscle balance, which is correct to a point, but obviously the body is more three-dimensional, there's more complex layers than that. So having a deeper understanding of fascial lines will aid with things like sports massage, corrective exercise, and movement analysis. A good website to start with if you want some extra reading would be www.fasciaguide.com. And just so you know, there are 12 myofascial lines in the human body. We've got meridians. So a meridian is a term originating from acupuncture, referring to energetic lines of transition and movement. So they see the body as lines of energy where energy flows from one end to the other, which it does, but they see it very differently to what Western anatomy and Western medicine would look at it. Personally, I think there's a place of both. I think they both make sense from the angle that you're looking at it from, and understanding both sides will give you a more well-rounded view of the human body and how it works. Myofascial meridians are lines of pull which transmit strain and rebound, facilitating movement and providing stability throughout the skeleton. So in other words, they allow you to move and they give you the stability to be able to do that movement. There are 3 basic types of fibers in the body that come with this. We've got elastin, collagen, and reticulin. Elastin is found in the skin, the elastic ligaments, and the ear. Collagen is seen in every dissection of an animal and is the most common protein in the body. It's the most common in the myofascial system as well. And reticulin is found in the embryo and is replaced by collagen when we become adults. So collagen is very important, and the abundance of collagen and fascia in and around the body is what gives us our structural integrity. And therefore, if we get fascial injury or we lose the amount of collagen that we have, or it depletes, our structural integrity will start to diminish as a consequence. With myofascial lines, stability, strain, tension, fixation, resilience, and positional compensation all come into play and are distributed through the myofascial lines during movement. Myofascial lines are pieces of a map, specifically of long, tensile straps and slings within the musculature. So you can see in this diagram here, I appreciate it's a bit small, you have lines running in different colours from top to bottom, across the body, round the body, and that's what really looks like a movement. So if you imagine kicking a football, not so much as what muscle you're kicking a ball with, but look at what lines are loading and unloading, you'll have a much better understanding of how to improve muscles in isolation, but movements and muscles also in integration, which will give you a much better result with your client, because you're not just training things by themselves, you're training the actual specific movement, and you are therefore able to make it more functional and applicable to what they need to do. The map of myofascial lines coupled with a traditional anatomy is going to help you to do this. And to be able to understand the myofascial lines, you need to be able to have a decent anatomy base, which is why we've left it more towards the end of the anatomy of your course. So we know about traditional anatomy, so everything prior to this point is it teaches you muscles in isolation, but the reality of movement is that things are much more complex and integrated, as we've said. So you'll have a more three-dimensional approach by understanding how these lines work and how movement and energy loads and unloads, which will reduce the risk of injury, improve the rate of injury recovery and performance, leading to happier, healthier and more mobile clients. But also they'll be strong in those movements. So mobility on one side of the spectrum, stability on the other. What we really want is stability in motion. So the study of myofascial lines and meridians was pioneered by the likes of three main people. There's a lot more, so I don't want to give them any disservice or play them down, but the ones I particularly studied as well have been Ida Rolf, Thomas Myers and Leon Chaitow. Thomas Myers is known for the anatomy trains, which is very much about getting cadavers from dead bodies and looking at the slings and how things work. Very, very interesting stuff when it comes to the rehabilitation side of things. The study of fascia is becoming more popular with personal trainers, physios, osteos, chiros and massage therapists because of the added benefits they can get from their clients, or for their clients rather. And it's been proven beneficial with rehabilitation, but also with performance. But what it's done for me personally is allow me to see the body in a more three-dimensional aspect, help me to solve a person's problems a little bit quicker, which then allows you to charge more money and command more respect from your audience. We have something called Davis law, which determines that soft tissue models itself along the position consistent imposed demands. So essentially, if you sit at a desk all day, your soft tissue is going to remodel yourself in that round-shouldered, short-hip position, and that's where your fascial tightness is going to be along with muscle tightness. So you can stretch the muscles and strengthen what's weak, but you would also benefit from reinforcing the structures around it, which is the fascia and the extracellular matrix, through things like massage. So this slide here, this is a photo of a lady called Ida Rolf, and she was famous as saying, "Where you think it is, it ain't." So there was another saying that comes from the kind of anatomy trains theory, is that it is often the victim that cries out and gets punished while the culprit gets away. And what that essentially means is, imagine you're a robber and you rob your victim. Now you as the victim have been mugged, you're crying out for help or pain, you're in distress. Someone then comes and beats you up, which you think, well, that's not very bright, why would you do that? It's a very good question. But if you apply that same thought process to, well, my lower back is in pain, my lower back is therefore the problem, so we go after the lower back. What it is often a case of is, due to lumbopelvic compensation, it's a combination of your thoracic spine and your pelvis that is bullying you from the top and then from the bottom, reducing the amount of motion you have in your lower back. So that therefore, instead of going after the lower back that is the victim, you would go after the culprit, which is potentially one of those sites, or it may even be somewhere else. because punishing the victim seems a little bit nonsensical, but we used to go, oh, we got a sore knee, it must be the knee that's the problem, whereas 99 times out of 100 it's to do with the surrounding muscles or the surrounding fascia or the surrounding joints or a combination of. So we often look at the foot, the hip, or at least the quads, the calves, the tibialis anterior, and the hamstrings. So where you think it is, it ain't, is what I want you to take away from that. And this is sometimes also referred to as referred pain. Okay, so going into the specific lines, we've got the superficial back line, as you can see here, runs from the bottom of the heel to the top of the skull. It prevents excessive body flexion and excessive extension. The muscles that are involved along this line are the plantar fascia in the bottom of the foot, the soleus, the gastrocnemius of the calves, the semimembranosus, semitendinosus and bicep femoris of the hamstrings, and the erector spine, which obviously divides into several groups. Going back to your muscular lessons and your origins and insertions. The postural function is to support the body in full upright extension, and the movement function is the creation of extension and hyperextension. Exercises to specifically train the SBL, the superficial back line, are things like the downward dog, the plow, deadlift, more so Romanian or straight-legged, a good morning, kettlebell swings, anything that creates spinal extension like a back extension, or medicine ball slams where you have to load the line to be able to unload it and accelerate to create the power on the opposite phase of the motion. With the superficial back line then, some of the postural compensations, so we looked at them, we're going to look at them from a muscular perspective in another lesson, but some of the postural compensations that may occur are limited ankle dorsiflexion, so tight calves, the prime cause of that, knee hyperextension, hamstring tightness, an anterior pelvic tilt, which you already know about from previous lessons, and cervical hyperextension. The plantar fascia is a key component of this line, or a key player, which is often responsible for problems communicating up the rest of the line. This can be in the form of tight hamstrings, lumbar lordosis, or cervical issues, or a combination of all of them. Things like massage or self-myofascial release through foam rolling or using instrument-assisted massage tools can be good ways to get the plantar fascia to communicate better with the rest of the body, because it's the first point that's in contact with the floor. If there's a shortening or problem there, it will remove or rob space and motion from the structures above it, creating a knock-on domino effect up the rest of the chain. Because the plantar fascia of its position and sensitivity, you might also want to use golf balls or spike balls, which are more common ways of stimulating that communication. But bear in mind that just doing that on the plantar fascia itself is just the first step. You then need to release and teach the rest of the line to communicate by going up the line in sequence and then creating an integrated movement to cement that new neural pathway and the new formation of tissue. Now looking at the superficial front line, the muscles involved here, the flexor hallucis longus, it's in the toe, big toe. Tibialis anterior, front of the shin, sartorius, the muscle that runs from the outside of the hip to the inside of the knee. It's not the quad, but looks like a quad. Vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris, all part of the quadriceps. You've got the tensor fascia lata, the TFL, which internally rotates the hip. And then you've got the rectus abdominis, the washboard abs, the psoas, which allows you to flex the hip, all the way up to the sternocleidomastoid in the neck. The postural function of the superficial front line is to provide tensile support from the top to raise the skeleton, which extends forward of the gravity line, meaning, in other words, it's going to give you the structural integrity to be able to bend forward. This means that the pubis, the ribcage, and the facial areas, essentially. The movement functions then are flexion of the trunk and hips, knee extension, and foot dorsiflexion. Exercises to specifically train the superficial front line are squats, sit-ups, sagittal lunges, step-ups, crunches, even leg extensions, banded, toe to shins, anything along those lines. With the superficial front line, some of the common distortions are a disparity between the SFL and the SBL, causing a hike, as you can see from this picture. And this is often the origin of neck, arm, lower back pain and breathing problems down the line, or if it's not the origin, it's at least a contributing factor that needs to be looked at. Next, we have the lateral lines down the outside. The muscles involved here are the perineals, the biceps femoris, gluteus minimus, gluteus medius, the TFL, the intercostals between the ribs, the QL, the external obliques, sternocleidomastoid, and the levator scapula. So think of it side view, muscles down the outside. The function is to balance the front and back, as well as the left and right, whilst mediating forces along the other lines, so it's acting to counteract and stabilize and offset any excessive unwanted movement. Its movement function is lateral flexion, hip abduction, foot eversion, and anti-rotation. Lateral line also may present. Next, we have the spiral line. As you can see, it spirals from the inside of the calcaneus through to the back of the scapula, and the muscles involved are the fibularis longus, biceps femoris, tib anterior, internal obliques, external obliques, serratus anterior, erector spine, rhomboids, and the spleno muscles higher up. Postural function is to help maintain balance across all planes, but it also helps to track the knee properly. So you can see from this blue line on the outside of the knee, if that's over tight, then the knee is going to drop in. If it's too loose, the knee is going to push out. Having this tightness also allows you to walk, which is part of what the function of the TFL is. Because if you didn't have a TFL, and it's supposed to be a little bit tight, so be careful when you get that over release because it is sensitive. And the IT band, well, the IT band is supposed to be tight rather, not the TFL. So when you get the IT band released, it's sometimes not advisable because it's not actually muscle, it's more soft tissue. The movement function, the spiral line, rotation, and core stabilization. The exercises will involve wood chops. As you can see, that would cut from the scapula across to the opposite hip. Rotational movements, such as viper uppercuts, kicking a ball, golf swing, tennis forehand or backhand, even boxing, throwing hooks or body shots. Compensations at the spiral line presented imbalances in length and technique during movements such as cutting diagonally from opposite hip to shoulder, as I've just given the examples of a wood chop. This also includes things like kicking. Moving on from there, we have the arm lines, which has actually got 4 different arm lines in total. I'm going to look at the arm lines generally, but you could have specific superficial back arm lines, deep back arm lines, deep front arm lines, and superficial front arm lines. The muscles involved are the pectoralis major, biceps brachii, latissimus dorsi, rhomboid, levator scapula, infraspinatus, supraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, triceps brachii, trapezius, and deltoids. Its postural function is to have a healthy mid-back to elbow relationship, so scapula to elbow, thoracic to elbow, and for good shoulder positioning, which all in turn will help contribute to healthy breathing function. Its movement functions are push, pull, and stabilization through movement of the upper body. The exercises might be bench press or any variations of these exercises, seated row, push-up, pull-up, shoulder press, lateral raise, front raise, and external shoulder rotations. Then we have the functional lines, where there's broken down into 3 more: the back functional line, the front functional line, and the ipsilateral functional line. The muscles involved here are the sartorius, external oblique, latissimus dorsi, adductor longus, as you can see what that black arrow is, rectus abdominis, it cuts across, the pectoralis major, the vastus lateralis, and the gluteus maximus. The postural function is to bring one shoulder across the opposite hip, either across the front or the back. And its movement function is to create power and precision in movements where you'll be able to generate a lot of force and acceleration. Again, chopping wood being a good example. Some other exercises you might do are throwing, punching, striking, kicking, hurdling, and kayaking. Running to an extent. So with functional lines, you've got compensations that occur with single side movements, such as hurdling the same side every time, bowling a cricket ball, or reaching for a tennis service or tennis serve, hitting a golf ball, same side. You're generally going to get less compensations if you are ambidextrous, but obviously that's not the case for most people. Okay, so we have the deep front line. It's the final one we're going to look into. So as the clue says, it's deeper, it's not superficial, it's underneath. And this includes the tibialis posterior, big toe flexor, popliteus, pelvic floor group, the adductor brevis, the adductor longus, the psoas, the iliacus, the pectineus, and the diaphragm, all highlighted here. Its postural function is structural support, stabilization of legs and hips, and assisted breathing. Movement function is hip abduction, breathing, especially inhalation, and the pelvic floor contraction. So we talk about that engage your core, not so much being about bringing your abs in towards your lower back, but more about pushing your tongue to the top of your mouth, pulling your pelvic floor in, and creating a vacuum through your abdominals collectively on the inhalation and the eccentric phase of a rep, and then relaxing on the way out. So I often teach engage your core as a 2-part movement, engage and a relax, depending on which part of the movement you're trying to generate force. So talking about unloading and then unloading, or decelerating to accelerate, if you like, because if you just held your core all the way through and engaged it the traditional way through something like a golf swing, you wouldn't be able to generate any power because you'd just be stiff all the way through. So there's nothing wrong with engage your core. There is 2 ways to engage your core. The other way, which you might traditionally know, would be things like where you use it for a plank, where you're isometric, you're not having to move, fine. But when you're moving, you want that little bit of a relationship of being able to turn things on and off, accelerate, decelerate, load and unload. Or we call it load to explode, which is where your power will come from. Postural function, or the exercises of the deep front line are the breath work, lateral leg raises, clams, and things like a side lunge, which hit the adductors. So here we have some good examples with these Greek statues where we can see the actual myofascial lines in different positions and functions. Feel free to zoom in on these and take as much time as you need to look at them, and you will obviously be able to see them in different movements as well. This is a nice visual of putting them all together in one place. As you can see, there's not just one fascial line working at one time. They're all working in conjunction and synergy with each other. So when it comes to the application of all of this stuff, we already know that understanding the fascial system can lead to better results in massage, therapy, and biomechanics. Foam rolling problematic areas can get more nutrition to the area, more blood flow, can also lengthen those structures. As part of a corrective exercise modality, you're also improving the neuromuscular input through the central nervous system through improved proprioception. This will lead to better chain reaction effects of movement, which can lead to better exercise selection and application, not just in the gym, but also in sport and everyday life. So have a look at this picture here of Johnny Wilkinson's kicking a ball, and using the previous slides, if you want to go back and try and physically draw on some of the fascial lines that you can see. So he's definitely got some stuff going on there with the spiral line, the superficial front line, and the lateral line, to give you a clue. When it comes to applying it into the gym or sport, things like TRX, Viper, medicine balls, Dynamax balls, and so on can be really good tools for replicating the load to explode element of utilizing myofascial lines and meridians properly. So it's that kind of deceleration to acceleration, load to unload, load to explode, all of that sort of stuff, where you have to be able to create length in certain structures to be able to generate enough force for you to spring back and accelerate, which is essentially what power is. The good thing with myofascial lines is it's not all one-dimensional. You're not just doing normal squats or deadlifts in the gym, bench press. You're able to mix things up and do more relative and sport-like patterns. So anyone who does strength and conditioning will know that there's a very strong place for the activities that you do in training need to look like what your desired outcome, task or sport is to some degree at some point. Not all the time, but there needs to be some crossover of, are you actually training for function and not just training for muscle groups? So we've only touched upon this a little bit because I didn't want to overwhelm you. It's a whole topic in itself that can take months and years to really master and understand. But if it has piqued an interest, especially if you movement and therapy based guys, I would highly recommend the following books. Anatomy Trains, the 4th edition by Thomas Myers. I've got the 3rd and the 4th. The 4th is just better visually and it's got more information. It's more up to date. Born to Walk by James Earls. And Biotensegrity by Graham Scarr. I also recommend going on the seminars and courses of the Anatomy Trains Foundation series. You will learn a lot of stuff and tap into a really good network of people that will really help to develop your career. Okay, coming to the end of this lesson then, we're going to have a quiz, as usual. So pause the screen, do whatever you're going to do, you know the drill by now. Number 1, how many myofascial lines are there in total? Number 2, what is fascia sometimes known as? Question 3, how many basic types of fibers are there in the body? 4, which law determines that soft tissue will remodel itself along its consistent imposed demands? Question 5, the plantar fascia, soleus, gastrocnemius, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, bicep femoris, erector spinae all form which myofascial line? Question 6, what are the 2 movement functions of the spiral line? Number 7, hip abduction, breathing, pelvic floor contraction are all movement functions of which line? Question 8, anterior pelvic tilt is associated with the distortion of which line? Number 9, bench press and seated row are exercises that stimulate which line? And question 10, who is known for saying where you think it is, it ain't? Okay, so the answers then. The answer to number 1, there are 12 myofascial lines in total. Fascia is also known as the extracellular matrix, is the answer to number 2. The answer to 3 is 3. 4, Davis law. 5, the answer is superficial back line. 6, the functions are rotation and core stabilization. Number 7 is the deep front line. Number 8 is the superficial back line. Number 9 are the arm lines. And number 10, the person who said where you think it ain't, is Ida Rolf. So remember this one, ideally if you're getting 7 out of 10, you're keeping up with your consistency for the rest of the course. You're not actually being assessed on anything in your theory exam or your paperwork from this lesson, but for those of you who've put it together, it will help you to reinforce and give you a more global understanding of your anatomy, which can only be a good thing. So that may indirectly help when it comes to your thought process and it comes to thinking or figuring things out, not only in your exam, but also with your clients in the future. Okay, to recap the objectives for this lesson, are you now able to understand the role of fascia, identify the major myofascial lines in the body, understand fascia's role in movement, and do you understand fascia's application for fitness clients and medical therapists? So hopefully now you see the value and the importance and the potential to apply this knowledge to a client. And if you get this right, this can really open doors to clients that you would otherwise not get, and it will also build better relationships with physios, osteopaths, chiropractors, and people of that ilk, because they'll be able to trust you more that you have better anatomy knowledge than the average PT.